So excited for you all. Tonight's speaker is a treat. It is an honor that he has joined us here tonight. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of his story. I first met Shayan when he began his AYF journey, his time with the American Youth Foundation, via Kids for Peace. So Kids for Peace is a program that happens at Mira Vista for a couple weeks each summer. And it brings together Jewish, Muslim, and Christian youth from Boston, as well as from Jerusalem. So Shayan started as a young one, willing to dive into this wacky thing called Kids for Peace. And for the last 6 years, he has been an incredible leader in that community. He's been an active member of the subsequent leadership programs. So he was a part of an enormous Houston-based program for a number of youth from Israel and Palestine and from all over the United States. And then he was a part of the Global Institute, where he went to Washington, D.C. and advocated on behalf of peace. So he has been using his voice for a long time in a number of incredible ways. He is currently president of the youth group of the Islamic Center of Boston. And he is someone who has constantly raised his voice. My very favorite memory of Shayan was when he was young and standing around the fire and in the most heart-moving and clear way stood up and shared his truth with us that night. And ever since then, that voice has been ringing strongly throughout our world. And so tonight he is here to speak with us. Given how strong his voice is, it would surprise you not to know that in 2018 he was the national runner-up in original oratory. In other words, pretty much the best speaker in the country. So, without further ado, Shayan Raza.
Thank you, Matt. And firstly, I want to start off by saying thank you to AYF President Anna K. Vorsteg and National Leadership Conference Director Joe Beatty, who somehow agreed to have a kid fresh out of high school from the most obnoxious city on the planet, Boston, Massachusetts. I also want to say thank you to the AYF Director of Programs and Camp Miniwanca, the wonderful Matt Loper, who coordinated the entirety of my being here. Last, but certainly not least, I want to say thank you to all of the incredible staff members who graciously volunteer their time and energy to the AYF, and without whom none of this would be possible. So please give them a round of applause. And I am privileged and honored to say to you all, welcome to the 2019 National Leadership Conference. And I want to start off by one of my favorite quotes from one of my all-time favorite movies. Avengers! Assemble. Alright, so it seems like many of you have seen the new Avengers movie. For those of you who haven't, one, what are you doing with your life? And second, for the Avengers, for those of you who don't know, are an ensemble of comic book superheroes from Iron Man to the Black Panther to the Hulk. In their latest epic, fittingly titled Endgame, the Earth's mightiest heroes must take down the evilest villain of them all. A mad titan named Thanos from the planet also called Titan, who has ultimate control over the universe with universe-altering entities called Infinity Stones. Now, raise your hand if I've lost you. Alright, I'm with you. And Director Beatty's over here thinking, oh my god, Boston kids talking about superhero movies. Now, I love superhero movies. I love the characters. I'm marveled by the storylines. I feel a sense of urgency with their conflicts. We cheer for the heroes, and we boo for the villains. But in this day and age, it seems like many of us in society have internalized this us versus them mindset. In other words, in some of the most extreme ways of thinking, a sociological concept called xenophobia. According to NYU psychologist Jay Van Bavel, Xenophobia, defined as a fear or hatred of foreigners, was an essential survival instinct in prehistoric times. Those who looked like us were equated with safety. Those who did not look like us were perceived as a threat to our safety. For example, Mr. Rogers in his warm, fuzzy sweater. Good. Vladimir Putin in your living room. Shirtless. Bad. In modern times, though, it seems that there are no more opinions or conflicts that aren't extreme. And xenophobia now is what nudges us towards hostility and eventually violence. According to a 2018 Pew Research Center survey, ideological polarization among Americans has increased almost twofold in the last decade. And more shockingly, more than half of the general population sees those with opposing views as a fundamental threat to our democracy. And it's this subverted view of the other that often brings out the worst of humanity. From the Rwandan genocide, to the Ku Klux Klan, to the Holocaust. This divide manifests in our everyday lives. It's not just in global acts of violence. We have turned our conversations into battlegrounds and our words into the bullets. And it's from the most trivial arguments about who the best color team is. It's yellow, by the way. I love it. To the most important arguments about laws and policies. As a Muslim, and now as a Muslim American, I'm on the front lines of this so-called battle almost every single day. It is crucial that we turn the page from a cutthroat culture to a new storyline by which we can all thrive together. Because while we may not be dealing with supervillains, it's time for all of us to stand up and be a hero. But before we can stand up and take a stand for any issue, it's important for us to step back and reflect on our own tendencies and biases. It was once believed by psychologists that stereotypical viewpoints were only held by those who were legitimately evil, like Nazis, Alex Jones. A couple of you got that. And that one blatantly racist relative that your mother insists on inviting every single year to Thanksgiving dinner. Uncle Richard. This theory was recently disproven by a study published in 2013 by psychologist Masr and Banaji. Given a list of various names, participants in this study were asked to identify the ones that they recognized as criminals that they've seen or heard about in the media. What the participants did not know was that every single one of those names that they were given were that of a criminal in the media. What occurred was that participants intuitively picked out an overwhelming number of African American and Latino sounding names. Banaji labels this type of stereotyping implicit because we know that we're making a judgment, but we just can't recognize the basis upon which we are making it. Take, for example, the Uncle Richards in our lives. You know from experience that anytime he prefaces a sentence by saying, "Look, I love Arabs," you know he's going to say something racist. And in addition to ignoring him, you're going to resist the urge to kick him underneath the table again. But implicit biases aren't always so trivial. They can help us to understand why, in the eyes of the law, names like Brock Turner are given moderate prosecutions to uphold their futures. Whereas names like Laquan McDonald, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, and Trayvon Martin all lose their lives. In the same way that fish don't recognize water, we as a complex society don't address or even recognize the blatant discrimination that we engage in and tolerate every single day. But fear is an emotion that exists within each and every one of us, and it's often uncontrollable. But that doesn't mean that what we fear is always informed or even plausible. Every year, Chapman University conducts a study of American fears, where they ask 1,500 adults what they fear the most. In 2016, the second most terrifying occurrence to the average American was a terrorist attack perpetrated by a Muslim in their communities. To put this into perspective, the New America Foundation found that since September 11, 2001, jihadists have killed 80 people in this country, which is tragic. However, in that same time period, the Center for Disease Control found that 7,650 people have died from falling out of bed in the morning. That means that you are 99 times more likely to get killed by a Tempur-Pedic than you are from a Muslim terrorist. So clearly, our fears do not arise pragmatically. They arise from that which is outside our realm of comprehensibility. In a world where we have a president that refers to immigrants as criminals and rapists, and foreign nations as shitholes, and have a sensationalized media that uses selective empathy as a business model, being fearful of others is unfortunately inevitable. But policymakers are not the only ones with the microphones anymore. Social media has given us all a platform on which to share our unadulterated thoughts. Yet, despite there being more ways of sharing our voices, a 2017 study published by Dr. Juliana Sugar at the University of Chicago found that we are now far more likely to argue with and dehumanize others because social media has made us neglect the fact that others can think or feel. In other words, we forget that there are people behind the screen who can hear us. Social media makes it clear that some of those among us type before we think. Sorry, haters and losers, but my IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. Yeah, real tweet, by the way. Hiding behind a screen not only hides one's ignorance, but also enables a mob mentality, where no one person is thinking or in charge. One hateful comment on social media then begets another, until it becomes clear that some thoughts that are egregious in person are seemingly acceptable when they're typed. Who convinced brown girls that they were pretty? Commented one Instagram user to my 13-year-old cousin, who later that day called and asked me why she was born with melanin in her skin. Or the man who on the Islamic Center of Boston's Facebook page typed, "Hey scumbags, tonight you're going to die." Only hours before my family attended our weekly prayer service. And sometimes, social media serves as a platform to validate our most heinous thoughts before committing the most heinous actions. a man in Christchurch, New Zealand, who wore a body camera to live stream his massacre of 50 innocent worshippers to Facebook. Platforms designed to unite and connect have now been subverted into vehicles of onslaught and hatred. And no, for those of you who are wondering, I'm not asking you all to believe the same things that I believe. I'm asking that an avenger doesn't have to emerge at my mosque and save my family from being shot. Because if that's our end game, clearly nobody wins. So how do we reduce xenophobia if it appears to be an inherent part of each and every one of our lives? Well, according to psychologist Gordon Allport, it begins right here, right now. Reducing prejudice towards others begins simply by exposing yourself to those you consider the other. This is demonstrated by America's most famous Muslim, who's not actually a Muslim, former President Barack Obama. See, after the election of President Obama in 2008, psychologists discovered what they called the Obama effect. A profound shift in perceptions of racial minorities in the United States, attributed solely to the fact that millions of Americans were now exposed to a black man who didn't fit racist stereotypes on their TV screens at home. Instead of the racist depictions of thugs and gangs and violence, America's association of a black man began to more align with family man, Harvard graduate, and President of the United States. Reevaluating what we think we know about others can lead to a near paradigm shift in our attitudes towards them. Just like being afraid of the dark, sometimes all it takes is for one person to shine a light. For us to realize that there was nothing there for us to fear to begin with. It's time for us to stand up to the idea of us versus them, and this doesn't require superpowers. It does take heroes, though. Like the late Senator John McCain, who during his own presidential rally defended opponent Barack Obama from racist attacks by his own supporters. It takes heroes, like every person on social media, who decided to use their platforms to raise awareness about the atrocities going on in Sudan right now. So it's time to redefine a hero. Not only is someone willing to take a bullet, but as somebody willing to take a stand. During my time at Mara Vista, the one quotation that has always stuck out to me has been, "One enkindled spirit can set hundreds on fire." As you go forward this week, I ask you to remember these words this week and for the rest of your lives. Because all it takes are a few people to change their actions. Suddenly, a few people become a group. And a group becomes a movement, and movements change the world. I dare you all to become part of that movement. This is a time for heroes. And each and every one of us can easily be a superhero. It doesn't take wearing a cape. Sorry, Miniwanca heroes. But it does require us all to stick to our shared values. Stand up to bullies and treat others with respect. This is a time for heroes. and to stand up to all forms of hatred and allow civility to prevail regardless of which side it comes from. This is a time for heroes and for us to be the enkindled spirits in our own lives and in our communities. This is the time. So Avengers! Thank you.
Shayan, how long are you here for?
Till Monday.
Till Monday. So we have a few days with Shayan. Please use them. Please seek them out. I know he's already kind of been connected to the yellow community, but Shayan has also offered to spend a little time with Q&A. Still up for that? So if there are any questions in the audience, we can have them be asked. But remember, we can do that in the individual sense as well. But just thank you. Thank you. So are there any questions out there?
Will you ever be on TED Talk?
Yes. Yes, I am now. This is better than any TED Talk could possibly be.
What are things we can do in our communities at home to make a difference?
For me personally, I'm very interested in politics, and I believe that our political system, while broken, can solve a lot of problems. So the first thing I would say is vote. Many of you are of voting age, so please do your civic duty and vote people who we want in power to be in power. Okay, like we can all complain about the problems we have in our world, in our country in particular, but if we can't do something about it, then we are not in a position to complain. So if you can vote, please vote. That's the first thing I would say. Second thing, raise awareness. Keep talking to people. Spread your message. Spread your voice. Share what you believe. And I was just in a philosophy interest group with Pike here, and he had mentioned that while we can't change everybody's mind, we can see where others are coming from and try to stick to our shared values, right? We can try to find the common ground that we all kind of agree on, and the basis that we can all agree on, but then beyond that, try to share your message, try to share what you believe, and like we've heard so many times at this camp, it takes one Enkindled Spirit to set hundreds on fire.
Hey, it's Tori. I know that you're very political, so recently I have discovered a shocking fact that when women get raped, the officers usually ask, what were you wearing? And I want to know, what was your stand on a wardrobe justifying women's rape?
I think that's one of the dumbest excuses. I would also say that it shouldn't take a man standing up here to have that. I hope that covered.
What do you think is the best way to approach conversation with those who are privileged about implicit biases?
It's a really good question. I think it takes, I'm going to reference the interest group that was just in. It takes, as we all know, everyone has their own, specific experiences that we all go through that help shape our beliefs. And like you said, those who are privileged in many ways, I myself, I hold implicit biases for for like my privileges as well, everyone has those biases in one way or another. And I think it helps to share your story. I'm gonna come back to that a couple times, but really sharing your experience with others, I believe, and I found with being Muslim and telling others what it's like to walk in an all white town, all mainly Christian town, being a Muslim, just telling people what it's like to what I go through. I'm lucky to live in a place where I do feel safe, but talking about my experiences has definitely helped and has others has generally helped. I wouldn't say change minds, but definitely make people more aware to the things I go through. So, but I honestly don't think I have a good answer to that either, because I'm still struggling. Like I'm still searching for the answer to that too. But I hope that that's just my experience.
Do you think there's a way to educate people about levels of oppression and things without sort of putting your oppression on display? Because a lot of times, for people of color, minority groups, and other oppressed groups, that's a lot on your mental health, having to go through your trauma over and over again. So if there's any way to do it without constantly opening up your own trauma for other people's education.
I think it's a really, really good question, and I'm still also struggling to find the answer to that as well. I found that being educated on everything I can possibly be educated on about an issue has really helped. Knowing what I'm talking about when I'm approaching someone who may not necessarily agree with me about certain things. And in Kids for Peace, one of the things that we talk about pretty often is, when you go into a conversation, make sure you are well enough to be in that conversation. If you can talk about something and it's gonna really get you upset, really not put you in a good place, I wouldn't enter that conversation. But again, that's just me personally. So yeah, making sure that you are in a place where you can talk about something without really hurting yourself and potentially getting someone else's feelings or offending someone else and all that stuff. So that's my experience.
What would be the best way to educate yourself on your own personal implicit biases? Because if you knew you had them, then you wouldn't have them. But everybody has, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's a good question. For me, I would say I've always asked my friends who don't have the same experiences as I do to always call me out anytime something happens where they feel that I've, with whatever my intention might have been, hurt them in some way, or said something that may have been out of line that I may not have seen. Like we've talked about intention versus impact. Your intention might not be to hurt others, but the point is implicit bias is that you don't know that it's happening. So yeah, I've always had people call me out on it. I've made sure that, like I said, that I know people outside my circle, that I'm not always hanging out with people who are just Muslim, just from a Pakistani origin, just immigrants, right? I really try to get to know a lot of people around me, and not just around me, but beyond that. And that helps, kind of opening your horizons and making sure that, if you would have had a bias in the past, potentially knowing people who are going through, or, being present for someone else's experiences may help you reduce those. But also something I'm still working on, so I can't. That's where I'm going.
So I know for me personally, in a lot of social situations, I will hear racist or derogatory jokes or comments. And I'm wondering what you think is a meaningful response to that without people just thinking oh, you're a goody two-shoes, and a response that will actually sink in and make them think about what they're saying.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think engaging, first of all, engaging in and of itself is huge. I think, like I said, calling someone out for any time I've been called out for something, it really leaves an impact. You know what I mean? 'Cause people normally we don't call others out when they you know, like on their bologna sandwich, you know what I mean? Like, it's like something like that happens. I think even just like starting off with a conversation, like, hey, like I heard you said this, or like, hey, you just said this, like, A, that wasn't cool, that hurt me, or that hurt one of my friends, and can you like tell me like why you decided to say that or something, something to that effect. I found that actually like engaging like a situation like that, and someone saying like, oh, like all my friends, like I've grown up saying that word and I never realized it was bad. It could just be as simple a situation as that. They were like, oh, I didn't know that was hurtful. I'll avoid saying that in the future. So I think raising your voice and trying to do it in a way so that it's not like confrontational, but you're actually just having a conversation with that person and trying to figure out why they said what they said or did.
With all the biased news sources right now, and like all the fake news, and even just like regular news stations that are kind of biasing their feed, where do you get your news, and like what would you say is like a good place? Like how would you get good information?
Yeah, I always try to. So this is coming straight from my AP Gov class. Always read the news. If you can find print, like New York Times, Boston Globe, something like that, if you can find print news, that's normally more reliable. And if you can if it's from like a reputable journalistic organization like the New York Times or Chicago, like I don't know what you have, like whatever it might be, right? Like always read, because normally those have more thought put into them. And then also, if you are watching the news, which is not a bad thing at all, if that's your means, go right ahead. Watch a bunch of different sides of like a viewpoint. So if you're watching CNN, watch Fox News once in a while. If you always watch Fox News, watch MSNBC or CNN like once in a while. Like see how issues are presented, and if if one thing is completely misconstrued in one thing that's was previously said differently another way, really try to see those things out, because like I said, news nowadays is just trying to sell, and they'll sell you whatever you are willing to read. So if someone who watches CNN is more passionate about one issue, they're only going to show them that one issue. They're not going to see the other side. So always try to diversify where you get your news and try to read.
What are your recommendations for going back into our communities and approaching those that have opposing viewpoints from us?
This is gonna sound really kind of almost obvious at a certain. Don't yell at them, because if situations will come up where you will want to yell at someone just as loud as you can and tell them to jump off a cliff. It's people will make you mad in everyday situations, and I've definitely had situations like that. Just be civil, really have a conversation with them. Don't try to shut them down or try to go off on a tangent about how they're stupid and how they don't know what they're talking about. Engaging with someone about a topic can really go a long way, especially if you do it in a conversational way. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we're going to kind of bring this to a close. One thing